there is a spectrum of sympathy and antipathy between a plant and a planet, and there's different layers of sympathy between a plant and a planet. So I wanted to go through those a little bit and just describe this, kind of tease this out a little bit more. The concept of sympathetic medicine can be kind of complicated. I remember when I was writing my book, Evolutionary Herbalism. If you don't have a copy of Evolutionary Herbalism, you should pick yourself up a copy. But I remember I was writing a section on sympathetic medicine, and my friend and colleague Matthew Wood was helping review the book, and we were talking a lot while I was writing it, and we were talking about sympathetic medicine. He was like, this topic is really hard to talk about because in a way it's like a Zen koan. Like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? It's like everything about it is paradoxical almost. And in that way, it kind of, in a sense, it's almost transcendent of, it's almost like a transcendent function. And in that way, very hard to encapsulate with language. But let's talk about some layers of sympathy between a plant and a planet. So one of the first and primary ones, and this is like astroherbalism, medical astrology 101, which would be organ, system, and tissue affinity. So this would be that planets tend to sympathetically correspond to certain parts of the body. Plants that also correspond to that part of the body could be said to be sympathetic to that planet and to that part of the body, right? There's a triangulation that happens there. So for example, we have, and this is just like a super quick run through, there's much more depth that could be gone into on this, but for example, Venus governing the kidneys and the female reproductive system, Mars governing the immune system, the adrenal glands, and the male reproductive system. You got Jupiter governing the liver and kind of metabolism as a whole. Saturn relating to the bones and the teeth and the structural tissues and the joints of the body. The sun relating to the heart and circulation and really the vital force as a whole. The moon as relating to the stomach and the fluids, the mucosa of the body. Mercury being the respiratory system, the brain, the nerves, and all of that. So this is one layer of sympathy that we can see between plant, planet, and person in that triangulation, that if there is an herb that, say there's an herb that has an influence on the blood and the immune system and the male reproductive system, such as nettles, different parts of the plant, but nettles as a whole does in fact impact those areas. That's a pretty strong sympathetic correlation to Mars, right? So that's a really good example of sympathetic principle of sympathy in terms of organ, system, and tissue affinity of the herbs. Then we have another layer of sympathy would be the energetics. This is an important concept in holistic herbalism, whereby we're looking at the impact of a remedy on the ecological state of the body, as opposed to just looking at the more biochemical effects of a plant. So very simple principle, very powerful though. In that, so we have herbs that are warming, cooling, moistening, drying, tonifying or stringing, and relaxing. So for example, warming herbs can tend to be governed by Mars and the sun. Jupiter also to a lesser degree is warm. Cooling herbs, Saturn is very cold, the moon tends to be cooling. Moistening, the moon is the predominant moistening planet. Venus can be moistening as well in some instances, and Jupiter can be moistening specifically in terms of oiliness. This is actually a very interesting feature of Ayurveda, whereby they see the water element as a kind of a grand archetype, the hydration of the body as being twofold, water and oil. Oil being more the pitta form of the water element, water being more the kapha form of the water element. But Jupiter really encompasses that in the way that it rules fats and oils. Drying, the sun, Mars are very drying by virtue of their heating quality. Saturn is very drying, tonifying, astringent. Mercury can be drying too, simply by nature of it is very movement oriented. Relaxant, Mercury and Venus can be relaxant. Tonic astringent, Saturn tends to be tonic astringent. So these are some different ways that planets can be understood sympathetically through their energetics. And this, in combination with organ affinities, can tend to lend a lot of insights into an herb and what planet is most sympathetic to that herb. So that is a really good foundation. Now, there's a lot more depth one can go into in terms of herbal actions, thinking through the actions of a plant, such as demulcent herbs tend to be very moistening to the mucosal membrane. Well, that's a very lunar quality, right? Moistening is the moon. The mucosal membranes are ruled by the moon, and demulcents do exactly that. So it's a very good example of a sympathetic property of the moon. So there's obviously lots of herbal actions, lots of interesting correlations that can be drawn between the actions and the planetary qualities. And basically you go about building a case. You map the herb out in terms of its organ affinities, organ system tissue affinities, the actions that it has, the energetics, and then you see all the correspondences to each of those individual characteristics. And then you start building a case for like, oh, there's a predominance of moon stuff going on here. And this is one of the ways that I go about attributing planetary correspondences to plants.